The story of Sleeping Beauty was never meant to be a fairy tale. It was designed as a tombstone, a carefully constructed narrative meant to bury the memory of a real and inconvenient historical event. Behind the magic, the thorns, and the true love's kiss lies the echo of an 800-year-old crime, the brutal, systematic, and very public murder of a queen. The victim at the heart of this story was no young, helpless princess. She was a political powerhouse, nearly 70 years old. We all think we know the story's most iconic moment, the prince's kiss that breaks the curse. But that single image is the most brilliant part of the cover-up. It is a deliberate and complete inversion of the truth. By the end of this investigation, you won't just know who was murdered. You will understand how the most romantic moment in the story is actually a mask for the most brutal act of the crime. Think back to the story you were told as a child. It begins with a grand celebration, a royal christening for a long-awaited princess. But one crucial invitation is forgotten. An evil fairy, snubbed and filled with rage, appears in a flash of dark magic and lays down a terrible curse. On her 16th birthday, the princess will prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and die. A good fairy softens the curse, transforming death into a deep, century-long sleep. The king, terrified, outlaws every spinning wheel in the kingdom, but fate cannot be avoided. The princess inevitably finds a hidden spindle, pricks her finger, and the entire kingdom falls into a silent slumber with her. A dense, impenetrable forest of thorns grows up around the castle walls, a living barrier sealing the sleeping kingdom away from the passage of time. 100 years pass. Then a heroic prince, hearing the legend, resolves to break the spell. He fights his way through the magical thorns, discovers the silent princess, and with true love's kiss, he doesn't just wake her. He awakens her entire world, restoring life and light with a single perfect act of love. It is the ultimate fantasy of rescue. This beautiful, sanitized version is the final, polished layer of a cover-up that has been hardening for centuries. It's a story designed to make us feel safe. But the original legend was never meant to be safe. It was meant to be a warning. To find the first crack in this pristine facade, we don't have to dig into ancient, dusty archives just yet. We only need to look at the version that existed right before the Brothers Grimm polished it for their collection. The version written down by Charles Perrault in the court of King Louis XIV, back in 1697. You see, Perrault's story doesn't end with the kiss. It doesn't end with the wedding. That's only the halfway point. What follows is a horrifying second act, a gruesome chapter filled with such shocking violence that it has been almost completely erased from our modern memory. And buried in that forgotten second half is the first critical clue we need to unlock this entire murder mystery. Because that is where we meet the monster. A cannibal queen with a taste for children. Did you ever hear that part of the story growing up? Let me know in the comments. This forgotten second act is our first breadcrumb. But what's truly shocking is how this story of a cannibal queen connects directly to the video's ultimate reveal, the public, state-sanctioned execution of a real historical figure. And we are going to see exactly how. In Charles Perrault's tale, the moment the prince awakens, the princess is not the happy ending. It is the beginning of a new and far more dangerous problem. They fall in love, and they are married by the castle's almoner in secret. But the prince cannot bring his new bride home. He cannot announce his marriage to the world. Why? Because his mother, the Dowager Queen, has a terrible secret. She is an ogress, and a secret this dark requires a key. Luckily for you, that subscribe button is the master key to our entire archive. Perrault tells us she has a vicious, uncontrollable appetite for the flesh of young children. The prince is terrified of her, and he knows that presenting her with a beautiful young daughter-in-law would be like handing a lamb over to a wolf. So for 2 years, he keeps his marriage hidden. He visits his wife in secret at a small castle in the woods. making up excuses about hunting trips. During this time, they have 2 children. The first, a daughter, he names Aurora or Dawn. The second, a son, he names Jour or Day. He loves his secret family, but he lives in constant fear of his mother discovering them. Then the old king dies. The prince finally ascends to the throne, becoming the sole ruler of the kingdom. Now king, he believes he has the power to control his mother. He believes the danger has passed. So he makes a grand procession and finally brings his wife, the young queen, and their 2 small children to the royal court to take their rightful place. It is a fatal, tragic miscalculation. The story we thought was over has only just begun. The moment the young king has real responsibility, he is forced to leave. He must lead his armies into a war against a neighboring emperor, leaving the kingdom and his family in the care of his mother, the Ogress Queen. The second he is gone, she sees her chance. The mask of civility drops, and the monster emerges. She wastes no time. She summons the castle's master of the household, the cook, and gives him a chilling order. "I have a mind," she says, "to eat little Dawn for my dinner tomorrow." The cook is horrified. He sees the ogress's eyes gleam with hunger and knows she is serious. But he cannot bring himself to murder a child. So he hatches a desperate plan. He takes the little princess to his own wife, who hides her away in their private quarters at the bottom of the courtyard. Then he takes a young, tender lamb and prepares it with a masterful sauce Robert, a rich brown mustard sauce. He serves it to the Ogress Queen, who devours it with satisfaction, believing she has just eaten her own granddaughter. A few days later, the ogress strikes again. This time, she demands her grandson. "For my supper," she commands the cook, "I will eat little Day." Once again, the cook cannot obey. He hides the little boy alongside his sister, and this time he slaughters a young goat, serving it in the same delicious sauce. The ogress is pleased, remarking on how tasty the meat is. Having consumed, so she thinks, both of her grandchildren, the Ogress Queen's evil appetite turns to its final target. She summons the cook once more and delivers her most horrifying command yet. She wants to eat the young queen, the Sleeping Beauty herself. She tells the cook to serve her with the same sauce as her children. The cook is now desperate. He has run out of options. He cannot possibly hide a grown woman, and he knows the ogress will not be fooled again so easily. He plans to slaughter a young doe, a female deer, and serve it to the monster, hoping to buy some time. He takes a large knife and goes to the young queen's chambers, intending to tell her the terrible truth. But at that exact moment, the plan falls apart. The ogress, impatient and suspicious, is prowling the castle halls. As the cook enters the queen's room, the 2 hidden children begin to cry out for their mother. Little Day is crying because he is hungry, and little Dawn is crying because her brother won't share a piece of bread with him. The Ogress Queen hears their cries. She instantly recognizes the voices of her grandchildren and knows she has been betrayed. She becomes, as Perrault writes, enraged to a dreadful degree. The deception is over. The monster is unmasked, and now she wants public revenge. She orders a massive vat to be brought into the center of the castle courtyard. Then she has it filled with the most venomous creatures imaginable: vipers, toads, snakes, and serpents, creating a writhing pit of death. Her command is simple and brutal. The young queen, her children, the cook, and his entire family are to be thrown into the vat, to be bitten and devoured alive. Her executioners tie their hands, preparing to drag them to their doom. But just as the sentence is about to be carried out, a trumpet sounds. The king has returned from war, far earlier than anyone expected. He rides into the courtyard and demands to know the meaning of the horrifying spectacle before him. The ogress is caught. Seeing her son, knowing her monstrous plot has failed and that her own end is near, she gives a terrible shriek and throws herself headfirst into the pit of vipers. She is instantly devoured, and the wicked plot comes to an end. The king, of course, is heartbroken, but also relieved. He embraces his wife and children, saved at the last possible second. But while this chapter closes, the real mystery is just beginning. This ogress wasn't just a random monster tacked onto the end of a love story. She is a crucial piece of evidence. It's a historical echo. What we're looking at here is more than just a monster. It's a specific archetype, the powerful, politically dangerous royal mother-in-law who tries to destroy her son's lineage to consolidate her own power. This Ogress Queen is more than a clue. She's a ghost. She is the fading memory of a real historical woman. And now we are going to name her. We will uncover the real queen whose brutal murder was so politically inconvenient, it had to be buried by a myth. To find the real woman buried beneath this myth, we have to travel back in time, long before Perrault, long before the first written versions of the story. We travel back to the 6th century, to the chaotic and violent world of the Merovingian Franks, a dynasty that ruled what would later become France. And there we meet our victim. Her name was Brunhilde. She was born around the year 543, not as a Frank, but as a Visigothic princess from Spain. And she was the absolute opposite of the sleeping, passive princess from the fairy tale. Brunhilde was a force of nature. She was highly educated, intelligent, politically shrewd, and incredibly ambitious. She married the Merovingian king Sigebert I, the ruler of the Eastern Frankish kingdom of Austrasia. But her real story begins with her husband's death. He was assassinated, and Brunhilde was left a widow with a young son. In an era where a queen without a king was often powerless, expected to retire to a convent, Brunhilde did the unthinkable. She refused to disappear. Instead, she seized power, declaring herself regent for her 5-year-old son, Childebert II. For the next 40 years, she would be the true political power behind the throne, first for her son, and then, after his death, for her grandson. She was a master of statecraft, a brilliant administrator who centralized power, repaired old Roman roads, built churches, and corresponded directly with the Pope. But her success, her gender, and her foreign birth made her a threat. The powerful Frankish nobles hated her. They saw her as a usurper, a woman who had stolen power that rightfully belonged to men. She ruled for longer than almost any king of her era, and with every year that passed, the resentment of her enemies grew deeper and more dangerous. Every story needs a villain, and Brunhilde's life had one of the most terrifying in history. The evil fairy from the tale, the one who lays the curse out of pure spite, was, in fact, a real woman. Her name was Fredegund. Where Brunhilde was a foreign princess, Fredegund began as a lowly palace servant. Through cunning, ruthlessness, and ambition, she became the mistress of King Chilperic, the brother of Brunhilde's husband. But she wasn't content to be a mistress. She wanted to be queen. To achieve this, she convinced Chilperic to set aside his first wife, and then she orchestrated the brutal murder of his second wife, a woman named Galswintha, who just so happened to be Brunhilde's older sister. This single act of murder ignited a blood feud between the two women that would last for 40 years. It was a deeply personal war that engulfed the entire Merovingian world. Fredegund and Brunhilde were perfect opposites, two rival queens locked in a struggle for the future of the kingdom. Fredegund was a master of the Shadow War, known for her cruelty and her network of spies and assassins. Brunhilde was a master of the public war, a political operator who ruled in the open. Their conflict was the engine of chaos that defined an entire generation. It was a dynastic war so long, so bloody, and so paralyzing that it effectively put the entire kingdom to sleep, halting progress and plunging the realm into a state of suspended animation, waiting for a final victor to emerge. The century of slumber is a perfect metaphor for the devastation of this feud. But every war has its weapons. And the fairy tale gives us one final, chilling clue to the exact method of murder that haunted Brunhilde her entire life. The curse in the story is delivered by a fairy. But the real curse that hung over Brunhilde's life was the constant ambient threat of assassination. And the fairy tale gives us a crucial clue to the weapon. The curse says the princess will die by the prick of a spindle. Why a spindle? It's a strange domestic object. But in the brutal world of the 6th century, it's a perfect symbol for the preferred tool of Fredegund's assassins, the short, sharp, often poisoned dagger. Fredegund was infamous for her use of what were called skrammasaxi, single-edged knives that could be easily concealed. Historical chroniclers like Gregory of Tours, who lived through this period, recorded her methods in chilling detail. She dispatched assassins to murder her rivals, her stepsons, and even Brunhilde's own husband, King Sigebert. These killers would often use poison on their blades to ensure their work was done. The prick of a poisoned blade, like the prick of a spindle, is a small, seemingly insignificant wound that delivers a fatal payload. It's a quiet, sudden, and deeply personal form of violence. The prophecy of the spindle wasn't a magical curse laid down at a christening. It was the lived reality of Brunhilde's world. It was the knowledge that at any moment, from any shadow, an agent of her rival could emerge and end her life with a single, silent prick of a poisoned knife. For 40 years, Brunhilde lived with this curse hanging over her head, and she managed to outlive her great rival, Fredegund, who died of natural causes. But she could not outlive her rival's hatred. This is where the fantasy shatters. This is the moment the cover-up was designed to hide. By the year 613, Brunhilde was an old woman, nearly 70 years old. She was still ruling, now as regent for her great-grandson. But after decades of her iron-fisted rule, the Frankish nobles had finally had enough. They saw their chance to get rid of her for good. So they betrayed her. They secretly conspired with her enemy, Clothar II, who was the son of her lifelong nemesis, Fredegund. The nobles switched their allegiance, handed over the kingdom's army, and delivered the elderly queen directly into his hands. And Clothar, the prince of this story who should have been her savior, became her executioner. First, he needed to legitimize his coup. So he put Brunhilde on a sham trial, accusing her of the murder of 10 Frankish kings. It was a ludicrous propaganda charge, a lie designed to retroactively paint her as the Ogress Queen of history. Then he delivered his sentence. It was not a quick or merciful death. He subjected the old queen to 3 full days of torture. Finally, as the ultimate humiliation, he brought her before his entire assembled army. He had her tied by her hair, by one arm, and by one leg to the tail of a wild, untamed horse. The horse was then whipped into a frenzy, and it bolted. Brunhilde was dragged, trampled, and torn to pieces. This is the crime. This is the moment buried by the myth. The romantic, life-giving kiss of the fairy tale is a direct, horrifying, and deliberate inversion of the historical truth. The awakening of the myth is the dismemberment of reality. But a crime this public, this theatrical, doesn't happen without a powerful motive. And understanding that motive is the key to understanding why this cover-up was necessary. The motive for this spectacular act of brutality was cold, hard politics. By murdering Brunhilde in such a public and dehumanizing way, Clothar II didn't just eliminate a rival. He ended the 40-year civil war in a single, decisive stroke. He terrified any remaining opposition into submission and forcibly unified the fractured Frankish kingdoms under his sole rule. He became the undisputed king of all Franks. But a crime this monstrous needs a justification. The victors always write the history. and Clothar's court chroniclers immediately went to work on a campaign of character assassination. They created the official narrative that Brunhilde was a cruel, monstrous, and power-hungry regent who deserved her fate. Her real accomplishments were erased, and her vilification began. This is how a cover-up starts. Over the next several hundred years, as the story of the Great Feud was told and retold, the specific names began to fade. Brunhilde, Fredegund, and Clothar ceased to be historical figures and slowly became archetypes. The messy, complex history of a political feud was simplified. The story of a powerful, brilliant queen who was destroyed by her enemies was simply too dangerous a narrative to survive in its true form. It was too inconvenient. So it transformed. The powerful regent became a helpless princess. The decades of war became a magical sleep. And the brutal usurper who murdered her became the heroic prince who saved her. The fairy tale became the final and most successful act of Clothar's propaganda. What happened to Brunhilde isn't just a curious piece of medieval history. It's an extreme example of a timeless and deeply human pattern. It reveals how we, as a culture, process and neutralize the memory of powerful women. History is littered with women who defy the expectations of their time, who seize agency and wield power. And so often, in the stories we tell about them later, they are flattened into one of two acceptable archetypes. They are either the scheming, evil monster, or they are the passive, tragic victim. The complex, intelligent, and ambitious human being is erased. The memory of Brunhilde was split into these two myths. The propaganda of her enemies turned her into the Ogress Queen, the cannibalistic monster from Perrault's tale. But the softer, more insidious cover-up turned her into Sleeping Beauty. It took a queen who ruled for half a century and transformed her into a girl whose only notable act is to be unconscious. It took her life of political struggle, of war and diplomacy and survival, and reduced it to a single passive state: waiting. The story of Sleeping Beauty is therefore doing more than just covering up a murder. It's also about the subjugation of female power itself. It takes a living, breathing queen, a formidable historical agent, and turns her into a beautiful corpse. A silent object whose story doesn't truly begin until a man arrives to give it meaning. That is the real crime buried by this myth. When you think about it, how many other stories do we tell that quietly erase a powerful woman from history? The erasure of a powerful woman is a pattern we see again and again. But what happens when the lie isn't about hiding a murder, but about creating a hero? The real story of Pocahontas is a twisted tale of how a prisoner was rebranded as a princess. To see that investigation, click the video on screen now.